They weren't heroes like the explorers. They weren't interested in opening up the new lands.
In 1963, one of Hollywood's most respected stars turned into one of its most hated co-stars. I'd rather stick needles in my eyes than work with her again, Charlton Heston fumed after a disastrous film shoot. The reason? Her awful breath, constant lateness, and one shocking betrayal that pushed him so far, he refused to even look at her on set. Decades later, the truth about what really went down between Moses and his leading lady still stirs up drama. And it changed Hollywood forever. Charlton Heston's story started far from the glamour of Los Angeles. He was born on October 4th, 1923, in a tiny Illinois town called No Man's Land. His parents, Lila and Russell Carter, fought to keep their sawmill running during the Great Depression, barely making ends meet. Life wasn't easy. The family packed up and moved constantly, chasing any shot at stability. When Charlton turned 10, his world got rocked. His parents divorced. The split hit him hard. His mom later married Chester Heston, a quiet but steady man whose name Charlton proudly took. That's how Charlton Heston, the name that would echo through movie history, was born. Even as a kid, he had this spark that made people stop and stare. At just 5 years old, he stood on a tree stump in the town square and recited, "'Twas the night before Christmas" from memory, leaving the crowd stunned. That little moment hinted at the superstar he'd become. Then came high school, and fate stepped in. At New Trier High in Illinois, Charlton randomly tried out for a school play called The Wrecker's Daughter. He didn't expect much, but boom, he landed the lead role. That surprise win lit a fire inside him, and his drama teacher quickly realized there was something special about this tall, serious kid with a commanding voice. Priscilla Weaver, Charlton's drama teacher, spotted his raw talent right away. She didn't go easy on him. She started handing him tougher and tougher roles, his limits. One of those was Macbeth, and wow, did he deliver. Even though Charlton was secretly terrified to perform, he owned that stage with his booming voice and serious presence. His dedication and drive caught the eye of a talent scout from Northwestern University, and in 1941, Charlton was offered a full drama scholarship. From that moment on, he was all in. Acting became his life. At Northwestern, he went full throttle, performing in 30 different roles in just 2 years. He barely slept, surviving on about 4 hours a night, but he didn't care. The stage had him hooked. One standout moment came when he starred in a small, low-budget student film adaptation of Peer Gynt. It wasn't some flashy Hollywood project, but it became his unofficial debut. That little film showed a glimpse of the powerhouse actor he was becoming. College wasn't just about acting, though. It's where he met the love of his life, Lydia Clark. They met during a theater production, and sparks flew fast. The two tied the knot in 1944, and their marriage lasted an incredible 64 years. In an industry where most relationships crumble fast, theirs stood strong through everything. That's rare magic in Hollywood. When World War II broke out, Charlton didn't hesitate. He enlisted in the Army Air Forces in 1944. He felt a deep duty to serve after the attack on Pearl Harbor. He trained as a radio operator and gunner on B-25 bombers and was sent to the freezing, isolated Aleutian Islands. The conditions were brutal: icy winds, endless nights, and constant danger. During one mission, disaster struck. His plane was forced to make an emergency landing on a tiny island. He and the crew were stranded for 3 long days before finally being rescued. What a close call. Even with freezing winds and isolation closing in, Charlton refused to waste a second. During his downtime in the military, he buried himself in books, memorizing Shakespeare and studying acting like his life depended on it. That kind of dedication showed just how serious he was about mastering his craft. After the war, Charlton and Lydia packed up everything they had and headed straight to New York City to chase their theater dreams. They ended up in a cramped apartment in Hell's Kitchen, noisy, gritty, and full of struggling artists. To make rent, they both worked as artist models, posing for painters just to keep food on the table. It wasn't glamorous, but they were determined to make it. Then came 1947, the turning point. Charlton landed his first big break on Broadway, playing in a revival of Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. Even though it was only a supporting role, critics couldn't ignore him. He had a commanding stage presence that made people sit up and take notice. Soon after, he started popping up in TV dramas, including a powerful performance in Wuthering Heights on CBS. That one role changed everything. Hollywood producer Hal B. Wallace saw it and instantly offered him a movie contract. Charlton was unsure at first. The stage was his comfort zone, but curiosity won out. He decided to give film a shot, telling himself he'd only do one movie to see how it went. That first movie was Dark City in 1950, where he played a shady gambler trying to stay one step ahead. The film didn't break box office records, but everyone saw it. This guy had star power. Then came a twist of fate that could have only happened in old Hollywood. One day, while walking through the Paramount lot, Charlton spotted the legendary director Cecil B. DeMille and casually waved. That one simple gesture changed his life forever. DeMille noticed him, and not long after, he cast Charlton in The Greatest Show on Earth, 1952. This circus epic was huge, with real performers, wild animals, and massive sets. Charlton trained with elephant handlers to nail his role as Brad Braden, the tough circus manager. During one intense scene, he nearly got trampled by a startled elephant, but somehow he stayed calm and finished the take like a total pro. The movie, The Greatest Show on Earth, exploded at the box office, snatching the Academy Award for Best Picture and launching Charlton straight into Hollywood superstardom. Overnight, he went from a struggling actor to one of the most recognizable faces in film history. But that was just the beginning. His name would soon become legendary, especially for his powerful performances in epic historical and biblical movies. Charlton's biggest breakthrough came in 1956 with The Ten Commandments, where he took on the role of Moses, and it completely transformed his career. Director Cecil B. DeMille handpicked him, claiming Charlton looked just like Michelangelo's famous statue of Moses. With his bold features, intense eyes, and commanding presence, Heston was Moses. No question about it. This movie wasn't just any project. It was a massive production with a jaw-dropping $13 million budget, unheard of at the time. Charlton threw himself into the role with total commitment. He grew out his hair and beard, dropped 30 pounds, and even studied ancient Egyptian and Hebrew to bring authenticity to every scene. He wanted the audience to believe he was living that story. But behind the scenes, things got wild. During the legendary Red Sea sequence, the special effects crew made a dangerous mistake. The water blasted out with too much force, and Charlton got swept away in the chaos. Crew members rushed in and managed to pull him out just in time, a close call that could have ended in disaster. And here's a crazy twist. Charlton also provided the voice of God in the burning bush scene. That meant he was literally acting opposite himself. He later laughed about it, saying it was one of the strangest yet most meaningful moments of his entire career. When The Ten Commandments hit theaters, it was unstoppable, raking in over $122 million and becoming the top-grossing film of 1956. Even today, it still airs every Easter, with Heston's Moses remaining one of the most iconic portrayals in cinematic history. Charlton Heston's next big moment came with Ben-Hur in 1959, the role that defined his entire career. But get this, he wasn't even the first pick. Burt Lancaster passed because he thought the story didn't have enough punch. Paul Newman said no because he didn't want to wear a tunic, and even Leslie Nielsen was on the list before Heston finally got the call in January 1958. Talk about fate stepping in. Ben-Hur wasn't just another movie. It was a colossal production that pushed every limit Hollywood had. MGM poured a staggering $15 million into it, making it the most expensive film ever made at the time. Heston knew this was his shot to make history, so he went all in. He spent over 4 months training to drive a real chariot, grinding through 5-hour sessions every single day. The man was fearless. He even performed most of his own stunts during the iconic chariot race scene. That legendary sequence nearly turned deadly when his chariot hit a rough patch and he almost got thrown off. But Heston held on with pure strength and focus, finishing the take like a true pro. The result? One of the most unforgettable scenes in cinema history. A mix of danger, sweat, and raw determination that audiences could feel. His dedication paid off big time. Heston won the Oscar for Best Actor. Some critics argued that Jack Lemmon deserved it for Some Like It Hot, but once people saw Heston's commanding performance, there was no debate. He was Judah Ben-Hur. He carried the entire 3.5-hour film on his shoulders, showing a mix of power, pain, and humanity that left everyone speechless. Ben-Hur went on to win 11 Academy Awards, a record that stood for almost 4 decades until Titanic tied it in 1997. From that point on, Heston became Hollywood's go-to man for grand, historical, and biblical epics. Over his career, he brought 14 historical figures to life, from Mark Antony in the 1950 version of Julius Caesar to John the Baptist in The Greatest Story Ever Told. Every role proved that when it came to playing larger-than-life heroes, Charlton Heston didn't just act, he became them. By the mid-1960s, Charlton Heston had become Hollywood's ultimate God and country guy, the man studios called whenever they needed a bold, heroic lead. He brought powerful historical figures to life, like Michelangelo in The Agony and the Ecstasy, 1965, and Andrew Jackson in The President's Lady, 1953. His unmatched ability to make these larger-than-life characters feel real cemented his status as one of the greatest actors ever to grace the screen. His unforgettable performances in The Ten Commandments and Ben-Hur locked his legacy in stone, a legend whose name still commands respect today. But behind all the glory, not every set was peaceful. When Charlton teamed up with Sophia Loren for the 1961 epic El Cid, sparks didn't just fly, they exploded. The production was massive, pairing 2 of the biggest stars of the era. Yet it quickly became infamous for their constant clashes. Producer Samuel Bronston had insisted on casting both of them, knowing their names would draw huge crowds. Heston was hot off his Oscar-winning triumph in Ben-Hur, making him the clear first choice to play Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, the legendary Spanish hero. At first, though, Charlton wasn't impressed with the project. He reportedly called the script minimally okay to crappy, which says it all. Still, he loved the idea of playing a man of courage and honor, so he agreed to fly to Madrid to meet with Bronston, director Anthony Mann, and screenwriter Philip Yordan. After an intense round of discussions, Heston officially signed on July 26, 1960, and the wheels were set in motion for one of the biggest productions of the decade. Casting Loren as Doña Jimena was another battle altogether. She was unavailable at first, forcing the studio to consider other big names like Jean Moreau and Ava Gardner. There were even whispers that Anthony Mann wanted to hand the part to his wife, Sarah Montiel, but both Heston and Bronston flat out refused. Eventually, Loren became available, though with one huge catch. She could only shoot for 10 to 12 weeks. To secure her, the producers had to bend over backward, locking in a deal that would soon lead to fiery tension and one of the most talked-about feuds in Hollywood history. Producer Samuel Bronston went all out to lock in Sophia Loren for El Cid. He offered her a jaw-dropping $1 million, making her only the second woman in history, after Elizabeth Taylor, to score that kind of payday. On top of that, she snagged a $200 a week allowance for her personal hairdresser. That didn't sit well with Charlton Heston at all. And honestly, it was just the start of a storm brewing on set. Trouble started before the cameras even rolled. Just 2 days before shooting, Loren demanded major script changes, throwing the whole production into chaos. Bronston had to call in blacklisted writer Ben Barsman to completely rewrite parts of the story. As if that wasn't enough, Loren hired another writer, Leo Feeney, to translate her lines into Italian, then back into simplified English so she could memorize them more easily. The constant delays drove Heston and director Anthony Mann crazy. They were ready to film with the original script, not keep rewriting it to fit Loren's last-minute demands. And things only got messier once filming started. Loren's obsession with her image became a serious problem. She'd spend hours in makeup and hair, even though everyone else was already suited up and waiting. Technically, her contract allowed it, but the constant holdups cost time and money. At one point, she refused to shoot until her costume was redesigned at the last second, forcing a major battle scene to be delayed. That single delay cost the studio a staggering $50,000, and Heston was fuming. Known for his strict professionalism, Heston hated wasting time, standing around in heavy armor under the blazing Spanish sun while Lorraine prepped and primped pushed him to his limit. On December 3rd, 1960, she showed up nearly 4 hours late to set, and Heston had finally had enough. He vented in his diary, writing, "Sophia's tardiness is not just unprofessional, it's downright disrespectful to everyone involved in this production." The tension between Charlton Heston and Sophia Loren didn't just stay behind the scenes. It spilled right into their performances. Loren had a habit that drove Heston absolutely crazy. She loved eating rich, garlic-heavy Italian dishes during her breaks. He complained nonstop about her pizza breath during close-up scenes, saying it made romantic moments unbearable. The crew eventually had to adjust the filming schedule just to keep their meal times separate so Heston wouldn't have to deal with it. By April 1961, things had reached the breaking point. During a love scene scheduled for April 7th, Heston flat out refused to film directly with Loren, saying their differences were beyond repair. He demanded a body double for her close-up shots, something almost unheard of for a lead actor. The producers, desperate to keep filming on track, secretly hired a Spanish actor named Rafael Alba to stand in for Heston during Loren's scenes. For a while, Loren had no idea, but on May 10th, 1961, she walked onto the set expecting to see Heston, and instead found Alba standing there wearing his costume. She was stunned, then furious. The discovery sparked a heated argument with both the director and producer, and word of the feud quickly leaked to the local media. Soon, the Spanish press was running wild with headlines like, "American star refuses to face Italian beauty." The scandal only made their working relationship worse. By the time they reached the film's emotional climax, the death scene where El Cid dies in Ximen's arms, Heston had had enough. He refused to shoot the scene for 3 straight days, holding up production until producers agreed to his strict demands. Eventually, they reached a compromise. Limited takes, minimal crew, and no unnecessary delays. He did the scene, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. When El Cid finally premiered in London on December 6th, 1961, the hostility was still alive and well. Heston and Loren barely spoke to each other, keeping their distance the entire night. They only posed together for the cameras because they had to, and the icy silence between them said everything. After El Cid, Charlton Heston had completely had it with Sophia Loren. Their feud didn't just end when the cameras stopped rolling. In 1964, he was offered another chance to star opposite her in Lady L, but he didn't even think twice about saying no. In a fiery letter to his agent, Heston made his feelings crystal clear. "I'd rather stick needles in my eyes than work with Loren again." That line became legendary. Pure Heston, bold and brutally honest. Loren, for her part, tried to stay diplomatic. In a 1966 interview, she admitted, "Charlton is a fine actor, but our working styles are very different." That was her polite way of saying they'd never get along. Their clash didn't just make headlines, it reshaped how producers saw them. No studio dared to cast them together again, afraid of sparking another on-set meltdown. Heston used the whole mess as a learning moment. In his autobiography, he talked about the importance of professionalism, writing about how tough it can be to work with difficult personalities in Hollywood. Loren, years later, reflected on it too. In her memoir, she confessed that every film teaches you something. Sometimes the lessons are about acting, sometimes about life, and sometimes about yourself. It was her way of owning up to how rough that shoot really was. Even decades later, the bad blood hadn't faded. When El Cid hit its 50th anniversary in 2011, neither Heston nor Loren showed up for the tribute event, a clear sign that the wounds from that film had never fully healed. Their behind-the-scenes tension became the stuff of legend, one of Hollywood's most infamous feuds that fans and film historians still talk about. But just when you'd think Heston had seen enough chaos for one career, He walked straight into another storm. In 1963, he teamed up with Ava Gardner for 55 days at Peking, and the production was a total nightmare from the start. The movie was shot in Spain, and things went wrong right away. When Heston arrived on set on May 15th, 1962, he discovered the script wasn't even finished. Only 140 pages of rough notes and summaries. It was chaos before the first scene was even filmed. The chaos surrounding 55 days at Peking only got worse once cameras started rolling. With the script barely finished and production already behind, the entire shoot turned into a grueling 17-week ordeal. Right from the start, the tension between Charlton Heston and Ava Gardner was impossible to ignore. On June 2nd, Gardner threw a fancy cocktail party at her Madrid apartment for the cast and crew. It seemed friendly enough at first, but that peace didn't last long. By June 10th, Heston was venting in his journal, calling their on-screen romance forced and the dialogue primitive. He was clearly losing patience fast. The filming conditions didn't help either. The summer heat in Madrid was brutal. Temperatures soared past 100 degrees, and the cast had to perform in heavy, suffocating costumes while battling dust, sweat, and exhaustion. Tempers ran hot, too. On July 3rd, Gardner exploded into a shouting match with director Nicholas Ray and stormed off the set, halting production for 4 long hours. The atmosphere on set was pure chaos. As if that wasn't enough, the money problems started piling up. The original $7 million budget ballooned into a shocking $17 million by the time filming wrapped on September 28, 1962. Every delay, every argument, and every reshoot drained both the crew and the studio dry. When the film finally premiered on May 29, 1963, everyone was relieved it was over, but the battle scars ran deep. Ava Gardner's behavior didn't make things any easier. From the very first day, June 5, 1962, the warning signs were there. She showed up 45 minutes late to the first script reading and was already visibly intoxicated. Her drinking quickly became a recurring nightmare for the production. She'd often arrive drunk, sometimes as early as 10 a.m., leaving everyone scrambling to keep the schedule together. On July 12th, she showed up so inebriated she couldn't remember her lines, forcing the team to shut down filming for 3 hours. By then, even the most patient crew members were at their breaking point, and Heston was furious. Ava Gardner's behavior spiraled even further as filming for 55 days at Peking dragged on. On August 3rd, she abruptly walked off the set in the middle of a scene, claiming she was too tired to continue. The crew had no choice but to scrap the entire day's footage, a move that cost the studio a jaw-dropping $50,000. Then, just 2 weeks later, on August 17th, her temper exploded again. She hurled a prop vase at a cameraman in a fit of anger. The vase barely missed him, but smashed expensive equipment, sending shockwaves through the production team. Her drinking and wild mood swings didn't just cause chaos behind the scenes, they wrecked her performance, too. Gardner struggled to remember her lines and often needed endless takes for even the simplest shots. On September 5th, things got downright painful. It took 27 takes just to finish a basic dialogue scene because she couldn't stay focused. By the time the film wrapped, her unpredictable behavior had added at least $2 million in extra costs due to delays, retakes, and crew overtime. The tension on set was unbearable. Crew members started begging to be reassigned to other units just to escape the constant drama. Charlton Heston, known for his discipline and professionalism, was reaching his limit. In his journal dated July 20th, 1962, he vented his frustration. Ava showed up 3 hours late today, reeking of gin. It's becoming impossible to work with her. Her unprofessionalism is staggering. Just a few weeks later, on August 8th, he recorded another blow-up. Another day wasted waiting for Ava to remember her lines. This woman is single-handedly derailing the entire production. When 55 Days at Peking finally wrapped, Heston didn't hold back his true feelings anymore. In a candid interview with Photoplay magazine in September 1963, he confessed, "Working with Ava Gardner was undoubtedly the most challenging experience of my career. It was a rare glimpse into just how grueling and unforgettable that chaotic shoot really was. Ava Gardner's behavior on 55 Days at Peking wasn't just unprofessional. It was downright destructive to the entire filmmaking process. Years later, Charlton Heston didn't hold back when he reflected on it in his 1995 autobiography, In the Arena. He wrote, "Ava Gardner, on the set of 55 Days at Peking, was a force of chaos. Her chronic lateness, her disregard for her fellow actors, and her often inebriated state made every day a test of patience." He didn't mince words. It was pure frustration poured onto the page. Heston called their working relationship the worst I've ever had with a co-star. And he wasn't exaggerating. He even recounted a particularly brutal day, August 25th, 1962, when Gardner arrived clearly intoxicated, stumbled through her lines, and began verbally attacking the director and several crew members. When Heston stepped in to calm things down, she turned her fury on him instead. He later admitted, "It took every ounce of my professional restraint not to walk off the set then and there." You could feel how close he was to losing it completely. Heston's criticism didn't stop there. In a 1970 film comment interview, he openly said, "Ava's performance in 55 Days was salvaged more by the editor than by any effort on her part. The number of usable takes was shockingly low. That was a harsh blow, but it showed just how chaotic the production had been from his point of view." Still, Heston wasn't totally heartless. By 1980, in an American film interview, he offered a rare moment of balance. For all her faults, and they were numerous, Ava had an undeniable screen presence. When she managed to pull herself together, which was far too infrequently, she could be mesmerizing. Even with all the drama, he could still recognize her natural magnetism on screen. So when the two were surprisingly reunited more than a decade later for the 1974 disaster film Earthquake, everyone was stunned. After everything that happened, nobody expected them to share a set again. Heston was hesitant at first, but eventually agreed, and the $600,000 paycheck definitely helped seal the deal. At first, the reunion between Charlton Heston and Ava Gardner on Earthquake seemed surprisingly calm. Heston even noted in his journal on February 10th, 1974, "Ava seems different, more focused, less volatile. Perhaps time has mellowed us both." It looked like the years apart had softened the tension between them, and for a brief moment, things felt almost peaceful on set. But that calm didn't last long. By the third week of filming, old habits started creeping back in. On February 25th, Gardner showed up 2 hours late, clearly hungover, and all that buried frustration came rushing back. The set went silent as Heston finally snapped, shouting, "It's like 55 days all over again." The deja vu was real, and everyone on set felt the tension all over again. Despite the rocky moments, both stars managed to keep things professional enough to finish the movie. Ironically, the film's intense earthquake sequences, shot with groundbreaking sense-around technology that made theaters literally rumble, ended up being what brought them closer together. Gardner later admitted in her autobiography, "Charlton and I may have had our differences, but when those tremors started, we were in it together. There's nothing like shared adversity to put past conflicts into perspective." When Earthquake hit theaters in November 1974, critics were impressed. The on-screen chemistry between Heston and Gardner was electric, raw, tense, and completely believable. Famed critic Roger Ebert even wrote, "Whatever real-life tension exists between these two stars has been alchemized into a compelling portrayal of a marriage in crisis." That mix of real emotion and cinematic drama made their performances unforgettable. Years later, Heston looked back on the experience with a touch of humility. In a 1985 interview, he said, "Working with Ava on Earthquake was, let's say, an opportunity for growth. We both brought our A game." Maybe the clash of two strong personalities had finally turned into mutual respect, or at least a truce forged through shared struggle and a desire to prove they still had it. Charlton Heston's real-life love story was something straight out of a movie, the kind of romance that's almost unheard of in Hollywood. He married Lydia Clark in 1944, and they stayed together for an incredible 64 years, right up until his death in 2008. Their journey began back at Northwestern University, where they met in an acting class. Funny enough, Lydia wasn't impressed at first. She thought Charlton was arrogant and way too confident, but one date changed everything. After spending hours talking, something just clicked between them. Lydia later said she completely fell in love that very night when Heston proposed, through a telegram of all things. She said yes without hesitation. It might sound old-fashioned now, but back then it was beautifully romantic. They tied the knot on March 17th, 1944, in a small, simple ceremony just before Charlton left to serve in World War II. It wasn't about glamour or money. It was pure love. Heston spent only $12 on Lydia's engagement ring, and she wore a violet dress with a matching hat instead of the typical white gown. He later said that image of her, standing there smiling in violet, stayed in his heart for the rest of his life. Decades later, their love was still just as strong. When their 50th wedding anniversary rolled around, they celebrated in grand style with over 200 guests, all dressed in black tie. Heston even made special booklets titled Pursuing Lydia, a personal chapter from his upcoming autobiography, a heartfelt tribute to the woman who'd stood by him through everything. As a surprise gift, he upgraded Lydia's original engagement ring, adding diamonds as a symbol of their lifelong bond. It was the perfect gesture, classy, sentimental, and full of love. Their family story was just as touching. After struggling to have children for years, they adopted a baby boy, Fraser, in 1955. Then, in a twist of fate, just 3 months later, Lydia discovered she was pregnant. Their daughter, Holly, was born in 1961. And just like that, the couple who once feared they'd never have kids suddenly had 2 beautiful children to complete their family. Charlton and Lydia's family story just kept getting better. Their son, Fraser, grew up to follow in his father's footsteps, not as an actor, but as a filmmaker. He even directed his dad in the 1990 adventure movie Treasure Island, showing that the Heston legacy had come full circle. Their daughter Holly tried acting for a bit too, but eventually stepped away from the spotlight to live a quieter, more private life. What really stood out about Charlton Heston was how devoted he was as a father, something rare for a Hollywood star of his era. While many actors of his generation were barely home, Heston made time for his family, no matter how busy his schedule got. Holly once shared that her dad always gave her his undivided attention whenever they were together. No distractions, no excuses. Those moments, she said, were what she cherished most. As Heston's career rolled into the 1970s and 80s, he began exploring deeper, more layered roles. He shifted away from the pure hero image and started tackling characters with sharper edges and hidden motives. One standout was his portrayal of Cardinal Richelieu in The Three Musketeers, a sly, ruthless schemer far removed from his noble biblical roles. Critics loved it, calling it one of his finest performances. During that same era, Heston became the king of the big-screen disaster genre. He starred in hits like Airport 1975 and Earthquake, both of which had audiences on the edge of their seats. Earthquake even used a groundbreaking new effect called Censor Round. It made theater seats rumble so viewers actually felt the quake happening. It was wild and way ahead of its time. Never afraid to experiment, Heston also stepped behind the camera in 1982 to direct Mother Lode, a film written by his son, Fraser. The movie didn't make a huge splash, but it proved that Heston was fearless when it came to trying new things. And of course, no list of his iconic roles would be complete without Planet of the Apes and Soylent Green. In Planet of the Apes, he played a stranded astronaut who discovers a terrifying world ruled by intelligent apes. A twist so shocking, it's still legendary today. The ending of Planet of the Apes is still one of the most jaw-dropping moments in movie history. When Charlton Heston's character discovers the half-buried Statue of Liberty and realizes he's been on Earth the entire time, audiences were stunned. His raw, emotional outburst, "You maniacs, you blew it up," instantly became one of the most famous lines ever spoken on film. That twist changed science fiction forever and sealed Heston's place as a cinematic legend. For the sequel, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, Heston only agreed to return on one strict condition: that his character would be killed off. He wasn't in it for the paycheck either. He donated his entire salary to charity. That move showed just how principled he was, even when dealing with Hollywood's biggest studios. Then came Soylent Green, another unforgettable film that left audiences shaken. Heston played a world-weary detective in a grim future where overpopulation and starvation have pushed humanity to the edge. The shocking twist, that Soylent Green is made from people, became legendary, sending chills down moviegoers' spines for generations. But behind the scenes, something deeply emotional was happening. Heston's co-star, Edward G. Robinson, was battling terminal cancer during the shoot. The haunting truth: Robinson's death scene in the film, where his character chooses to die peacefully while watching images of nature, was also his real-life final performance. Heston later revealed that filming that moment left him shaken, saying he was haunted by the thought that Robinson knew it was his last goodbye on camera. In 2003, Heston received one of the nation's highest honors, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, awarded by President George W. Bush. The moment came just a year after Heston publicly revealed he was showing early signs of Alzheimer's disease. Even as his health declined, he faced the world with strength and dignity. At the ceremony, he stood tall and proud, celebrated not only for his legendary acting career, from Moses to Ben-Hur, but also for his political presence, especially as president of the NRA. His defiant phrase, "From my cold, dead hands," became a lasting symbol of his conviction and passion. That final appearance as NRA president, despite his illness, showed the world that Charlton Heston's spirit was unshakable. Charlton Heston's final public gesture became one of the most powerful moments of his life, when he raised a rifle high above his head, defiant and proud, showing the world that his spirit would never be broken. Then, in August 2002, the Hollywood legend made a heartbreaking announcement that stunned his fans everywhere. At 78 years old, Heston revealed in a recorded video message that doctors had told him he might have Alzheimer's disease. At the time, few celebrities ever spoke publicly about such personal struggles, making his openness both shocking and deeply moving. In the video, Heston spoke with the same calm strength that had defined so many of his film characters. His voice wavered slightly, but his resolve was clear. "I wanted to say these words now," he said, "because when the time comes, I might not be able to." Fans were deeply touched by his honesty and courage. Then came the line that summed up everything about who he was: "I'm neither giving up nor giving in." That fearless attitude reminded everyone of the heroes he'd played on screen, strong, unyielding, and full of heart. The announcement came after a difficult few years. Just 2 years earlier, Heston had quietly checked into a clinic for alcohol treatment, showing that even larger-than-life figures face private battles. His Alzheimer's diagnosis was another mountain to climb, but he faced it head-on, just as he had done in his movies. The news also echoed something deeply personal. 8 years earlier, Heston's close friend, former President Ronald Reagan, had revealed his own Alzheimer's diagnosis. The parallels between the two icons, both known for their strength, leadership, and conviction, struck a chord with millions. Heston's decision to go public inspired widespread admiration, with many praising him for helping others feel less afraid to talk about their own health struggles. After his announcement, Heston began stepping away from the public eye. For a man who had spent over 50 years commanding the big screen, that retreat was no easy task. He once said, "For an actor, there is no greater loss than the loss of his audience." In 2003, he officially stepped down as president of the National Rifle Association, closing one of the most visible chapters of his extraordinary life. Charlton Heston's farewell speech at the NRA convention was powerful, a moment no one in the audience would ever forget. His voice trembled, yet his spirit was as fierce as ever. It was the last time fans saw him standing strong before the cruel progression of Alzheimer's began to take hold. Sadly, by 2005, just 3 years after revealing his diagnosis, Heston's condition had worsened dramatically. Family and friends were heartbroken to see how much he had changed. The man who had once commanded screens as Moses and Judah Ben-Hur, symbols of strength and defiance, was now too weak to even rise from bed. It was a painful contrast that moved his fans around the world to tears. On April 5th, 2008, Charlton Heston passed away peacefully at his Beverly Hills home. He was 84 years old, and by his side, as always, was his devoted wife of 64 years, Lydia. Reports later confirmed that he had succumbed to pneumonia, a common complication of Alzheimer's disease. When the news broke, the outpouring of love and grief was immediate. President George W. Bush honored him with moving words, calling him a man of character and integrity with a big heart. Fans, colleagues, and admirers from all walks of life reflected on his towering legacy, not just as a Hollywood legend, but as a man who stood by his convictions. Some remembered his unforgettable roles that defined an era, while others celebrated his courage in championing civil rights in the 1960s and his later work as a passionate advocate for gun rights. On April 12, 2008, a private funeral was held at his church in Pacific Palisades. About 250 guests gathered to say their final goodbyes. Among them were Nancy Reagan, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Tom Selleck, and Christian Bale, a testament to how deeply Heston's life had touched both Hollywood and American culture. Charlton Heston left behind more than just films. He left behind a legacy of strength, conviction, and timeless artistry that continues to inspire generations. His story reminds us that courage doesn't fade with age or illness. It burns until the very end. If you enjoyed this look into the life of Charlton Heston, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment below. Tell us which of his legendary performances moved you the most.